Naomi, what the hell are you doing out here? You're soaking wet. Victor Ellington slammed his car door and strode into the storm, rain splattering against the polished leather of his shoes. His voice was sharp, cut through the night like a whip. All he could see was her, Naomi Carter, the new maid, huddled beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the estate garden, a flimsy lunchbox balanced on her knees. Her uniform clung to her skin, plastered by the downpour. Dark strands of hair stuck to her cheeks. She looked half-frozen, spoon in hand, trembling as if the cold had seeped into her bones. Naomi! Victor barked again, disbelief curdling into anger. Why the hell are you eating out here? Get inside! She startled, like a cornered animal, snapping the lid shut as though hiding contraband. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, voice barely audible under the rain. I didn't mean. Before she could finish, another voice carried smoothly across the courtyard. Controlled, rehearsed. She shouldn't even be here, sir, said Margaret Cole, the housekeeper, stepping forward under her umbrella with perfect poise. Not a hair out of place, not a tremor in her tone. I was just about to inform you. She nearly caused a disaster this afternoon. Carelessness in the nursery. I caught her leaving the window wide open near the baby's crib. Daniel could have gotten sick. Victor stiffened. The mention of his son's name was enough to ignite him. The image flashed. Daniel, his infant boy, born blind, fragile from the moment he entered the world. He could not afford risks, not with the child who carried the Ellington name. What? His voice was low, edged with fury. Margaret gave a sigh of regret so measured it almost sounded sincere. I found the window ajar, the curtains soaked through. I told her 100 times the nursery requires constant care. She said nothing, only shrugged. I fear she doesn't understand the delicacy required. Naomi's head shot up, panic flaring in her eyes. That's not true, sir. I would never. Victor cut her off, his chest rising, veins tightening in his neck. You think I'll tolerate negligence around my son? Around Daniel? No, sir. I swear. Naomi's words cracked, drowned out by thunder. She scrambled to her feet, slipping on the slick stone. The lunchbox fell, food spilling into the mud. Her palms scraped against the gravel, blood mingling with rainwater, but she didn't cry out. She only looked up at him, drenched and shivering, her gaze wide and pleading. I didn't do it, she whispered, trembling but steady. Please believe me. Victor towered above her, torn between fury and something he couldn't name. Behind him, Margaret's calm expression never wavered. She has been careless for weeks, the housekeeper murmured silkily. I've warned her. She's not fit for delicate work, sir. Not when the child's health is at stake. Naomi turned toward Margaret, desperation breaking through her fear. That's not true, and you know it. You told me. She stopped short when Margaret's eyes narrowed, a faint smile ghosting her lips, invisible to Victor but sharp enough to silence Naomi's tongue. Victor dragged his hand through his soaked hair, exhaling hard. The storm outside matched the storm inside him. Grief, exhaustion, rage. I don't want to hear another word. Clean this up. We'll discuss it tomorrow. Margaret inclined her head obediently. Of course, sir. I'll see that she does. Naomi pressed her bleeding palm against her apron, nodding faintly. Yes, sir. Victor turned on his heel and strode back toward the mansion. But as he crossed the threshold, something pierced through the thunder, the sound of his son's cries drifting faintly from upstairs. He stopped. It wasn't unusual for Daniel to cry, but tonight the wails were sharp, rhythmic, almost frantic. They rose and fell in a strange pattern, echoing against the walls like a plea no one answered. Victor hesitated. His gut twisted. Margaret had said everything was fine in the nursery, yet the cries rang hollow, too long, too unattended. Still he pushed on, convincing himself it was exhaustion playing tricks. The housekeeper was loyal. She had managed the estate since his mother's death. Naomi was new, untested, clumsy, perhaps even manipulative. And yet, as he shut the study door behind him, the image wouldn't leave his mind. Naomi in the rain, clutching her small meal like it was the only thing she owned. Her voice trembling with insistence. Please believe me. In the storm's silence, the seed was planted. Naomi Carter had seen something, had heard something, that no one else noticed. And for the first time in years, Victor Ellington felt a flicker of doubt in the story he had been told about his household, his son, and the fragile world he thought he controlled. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to Tales by Amani and hit the like button. The mansion had a way of swallowing sound. Its long corridors seemed built for silence, so that every voice that dared to rise above a whisper carried like contraband. Naomi Carter learned that quickly. The moment she stepped into the kitchen one early morning, tray in hand, she caught the tail end of a hushed exchange. "Blind since birth," one maid murmured, eyes flicking to the doorway as if the walls themselves had ears. "A curse," another added under her breath. "That's what my mother would call it. God's punishment." The words settled like ash, heavy and foul, and the moment Naomi entered, both women busied their hands with cutlery and pots. But the air never cleared. Naomi felt the weight of it pressing down, lingering in the marble and chandeliers. It was Daniel, the baby upstairs. The child no one spoke of above a murmur. Naomi had seen him only briefly, nestled in blankets in the corner of the nursery, the room dim even at midday. Other staff passed by quickly, eyes lowered, as though the infant himself carried shame. But Naomi, she lingered. The first time, she only meant to straighten the drapes. Yet she found herself drawn to the faint sound of soft cooing. Daniel's tiny fingers curled and uncurled in the half-light. She hesitated, then stepped closer, her presence unannounced. He startled slightly at her shadow, his head turning, his mouth parting as if listening. Naomi froze, breath caught in her chest. He couldn't see her, at least, that's what everyone said. But there it was, the unmistakable flicker of recognition. His ears caught what his eyes could not. Naomi knelt beside him, whispering low, "Hello, little one." To her shock, the baby stilled. Then slowly, his head turned toward her voice. Her throat tightened. How could no one notice? Every chance she got, Naomi found excuses to pass near the nursery, adjusting linens, dusting a shelf, anything to linger. And each time, she observed something new. Daniel flinched when the maid's broom handle fell too close, his tiny body jerking at the sharp sound. He stretched toward the light from a window cracked open, turning his face to the sun as though reaching for warmth. They weren't accidents. They were responses. Signs. But in that house, compassion was dangerous. One afternoon, Naomi's hand hovered just above Daniel's crib when a shadow darkened the doorway. Margaret Cole, the housekeeper, stood with folded arms, her stare like a blade. "You should know better," Margaret said, voice cold. Naomi drew back instantly, heat flooding her face. "I was only. You were out of line." Margaret's heels clicked against the hardwood as she stepped closer, the rhythm like a judge's gavel. "That child is off limits. Do your work and keep your distance." Naomi opened her mouth, but no words came. Margaret's authority was absolute here. Everyone knew it. She was more than a housekeeper. She was the gatekeeper of Victor Ellington's grief, the one who rationed his peace and dictated the staff's loyalty. "Stay in your place," Margaret finished, her lips curving in the faintest smile. "Or you won't have one." The warning lodged deep. From then on, Naomi kept her distance physically, but her eyes stayed sharp. She watched as Margaret moved through the house like a puppeteer, strings invisible but taut. Meals were timed not for appetite but for Margaret's convenience. Doors Naomi thought were open-closed suddenly under her supervision. And always, there was the subtle drip of poison, a muttered complaint about Naomi's clumsiness, a suggestion that Victor's trust was misplaced, whispers delivered with such quiet conviction that even Naomi began to doubt herself. Yet Naomi also saw what Margaret wanted hidden. She saw Victor sitting late into the night in his study, head in his hands, glass of whiskey untouched, the nursery monitor flickering faintly beside him. She saw the way he stiffened whenever Daniel's cries carried through the halls, as though the sound reminded him not of life but of loss. And she saw, most painfully, how quickly he turned when Margaret appeared at his side, her hand lightly brushing his arm, her voice honeyed with concern. It was all a performance. Naomi could see it now. Margaret isolated him, little by little, walling him off from both staff and son. And Victor, buried under grief and guilt, never noticed. Still, Naomi couldn't unsee what she had witnessed in Daniel's small movements, the flicker of light caught in unseeing eyes, the instinctive turn toward sound. There was something there. Something more than blindness. Something alive. Each night, alone in her small room at the edge of the servants' quarters, Naomi turned the day over in her mind. She thought of Daniel's tiny hand curling around her finger. She thought of Margaret's sharp eyes, the way they seemed to dare her to care. And she thought of Victor, trapped in sorrow, blind in his own way. Naomi had entered this mansion as just another maid, invisible and replaceable. But now, she carried a secret no one else seemed to notice. A secret that tied her not just to the child, but to the man who couldn't see what was right in front of him. And in the silence of those corridors, Naomi made a quiet vow: she would keep watching. The rain had passed, but its residue clung to the Ellington estate like a veil. Puddles glistened along the stone path, and the roses in the front garden bent under the weight of leftover droplets. Naomi Carter had barely slept since the storm. The humiliation of being scolded lingered in her chest, but what weighed heavier was the echo of Daniel's cries. Sharp, repetitive, unanswered in the night. Something about them felt wrong. Not the cries themselves, but the way they went ignored, muffled behind thick doors and silences. By morning, she moved carefully, like a shadow within the mansion. Her duties were endless: polishing, sweeping, gathering linen, but her eyes and ears strayed to the nursery whenever footsteps softened down the hall. It was there she sometimes paused, pretending to dust the wooden banister, listening. She noticed small things. Daniel startled at a sudden clang from the kitchen below. He shifted his face toward the faint shafts of sunlight when the curtains weren't drawn. Little things that no one else seemed to see. But the house was not forgiving. Margaret Cole, with her precise posture and clipped words, had a way of controlling not only the staff but the atmosphere itself. Conversations ended when she entered a room. Rumors were born in her absence but carried her fingerprints. And this morning, she had sharpened her blades. The setup was almost too neat. Naomi had been assigned laundry duties, a task Margaret rarely trusted her with, and while carrying folded linen upstairs, she found herself summoned to the nursery. The window had been left ajar, wind gusting through, fluttering the baby's blanket dangerously close to his face. Daniel whimpered, fussing. Victor Ellington entered at that exact moment. His presence filled the room before his words did. "What in God's name?" His voice cracked like a whip. He strode forward, snatching Daniel from the crib, eyes wide with panic. "The window! In this cold! Are you trying to kill him?" Naomi froze, linen slipping from her arms onto the polished floor. Her breath caught in her throat. "No, sir," she stammered, palms trembling. "I didn't. I would never." Margaret appeared in the doorway with uncanny timing, her face the portrait of solemnity. "I found her here, sir," she said smoothly. "I warned her the child must never be left exposed. She brushed me off. Now look." Naomi shook her head fiercely, stepping forward. "That isn't true. I just walked in. The window." Victor's eyes blazed. The image of his son, vulnerable and blind from birth, nearly smothered by carelessness, it ignited every raw wound in him. His grief for the child his family whispered about as cursed, his sleepless nights, his own helplessness. All of it funneled into rage at the maid standing before him. "Enough!" His voice thundered, sharp enough to silence even Margaret's poised expression. "I will not have lies in this house." He set Daniel back into the crib, tucking the blanket with trembling hands, then turned on Naomi. "You are reckless, dishonest. My son's life is not a plaything for incompetence." Naomi's knees weakened, her back pressing against the wall. She wanted to defend herself, to insist again that she had just entered, but the fury in his eyes left her words strangled. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I would never harm him. Never." Victor advanced a step, fists clenched. "Do not speak another word." The force of his voice startled her so badly that she stumbled, her heel catching on the fallen linen. She slipped sideways, her palms scraping against the sharp edge of a side table. A thin line of blood streaked across her skin. She gasped, not from the sting but from the weight of the moment, the crushing realization that no matter what she said, she was already condemned in his eyes. Margaret watched, expression carefully unreadable. But Naomi caught the faintest flicker of satisfaction in the housekeeper's gaze before it was masked with pity. "Sir," Margaret said gently, as though soothing him, "perhaps she should be dismissed. It is not safe." Victor turned sharply away, chest heaving. He poured a glass of bourbon from the decanter on the shelf, his hand trembling just enough to slosh amber liquid down the side. He drained half of it in one swallow, staring into the fire that had long since died to embers. Naomi, clutching her scraped hand to her chest, whispered again, this time only to herself. "I would never hurt him. Never." Victor did not answer. That night, the mansion was wrapped in silence. Victor sat alone in the nursery, bourbon glass still in his hand. Daniel slept fitfully in the crib, small fists curling and uncurling in the shadows. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy with exhaustion, but his mind whirred. He replayed Naomi's face in the moment of accusation, the raw panic, the cracked voice, the stubborn insistence. She had looked sincere, too sincere. And Margaret's account? Smooth, convincing, but almost too well-timed. Had it not been her who assigned Naomi to the laundry? Had it not been her who summoned him to the nursery with such urgency? Suspicion crept into his thoughts like smoke. But he smothered it with guilt and bourbon, staring at the blind eyes of his son and whispering an apology that was as much to himself as to the child. "I can't lose you too," he murmured, his throat tight. Daniel stirred, a faint whimper escaping his lips. His face tilted instinctively toward the dying firelight. Victor froze, glass trembling in his grip. He rubbed his eyes, telling himself it was nothing. Just instinct. Just a coincidence. The rain-washed gardens glistened in the pale morning light. Birds flitted cautiously among the hedges, and the scent of damp earth rose from the soil. Naomi Carter walked the back path with a basket of linens, her steps slow, her mind heavier than her load. Every corner of the Ellington estate seemed to whisper accusations. Every shadow seemed to carry Margaret's cold eyes. It was then that Samuel appeared, the gardener, stooped with age but steady as ever. His weathered face bore years of sun and secrets. He had always moved quietly through the estate, trimming roses, turning soil, watching without being watched. Naomi had noticed him often but never heard him speak more than a nod of greeting. Today, though, he paused, his shears hanging loosely from his hand. "Miss Naomi," he said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one lingered. "Walk with me a moment." Startled, Naomi adjusted the basket on her hip. "Yes, sir." He gestured her toward the greenhouse. Inside, the air was thick with humidity, the glass walls dripping with condensation. For once, the old man's calm felt unsettled, his hands fidgeting with the shears as though buying himself time. "I've been here near 30 years, Samuel began, voice hushed. "Long before Mr. Ellington married. Long before little Daniel. And I've seen things, Miss Naomi. Things people forget when they think the gardener is just part of the scenery." Naomi's brow furrowed. She felt the weight in his words but kept quiet, afraid to break the fragile courage he had summoned. Samuel leaned closer. "You're not the first she's targeted. Margaret. That woman knows how to twist truth until it strangles whoever stands in her way. I've seen her move trinkets, hide silverware, then discover it in a maid's apron. Good girls sent away in shame. She keeps the house under her thumb, and Mr. Ellington, he's blind to it. Blind with grief. Blind with trust." Naomi's heart quickened. "But why tell me?" she whispered. His eyes softened. "Because I see the way you look at that baby. With care. With gentleness. No one else dares go near him. But you do. And I've seen him turn his head when you open the curtains, jump at the sound of your footsteps. That boy sees more than they admit." Her throat tightened. She had thought she was the only one who noticed. "Samuel, do you think?" He nodded slowly. "I think Margaret needs people to believe the boy is broken. Because the more hopeless Victor feels, the more he clings to her. She thrives on his despair. A chill ran down Naomi's spine. The pieces clicked together. The whispers, the warnings, the constant presence of Margaret whenever Victor's temper flared. Samuel drew something from his pocket. A small, worn notebook, its cover stained with soil and time. "I write things down," he said simply. "Every time I see her meddle. Every lie, every trick. I never dared share it before. But you might be the one who needs it." Naomi took the notebook with trembling hands, feeling as though he had handed her a torch in a cave. The entries were brief but damning. Notes of times Margaret staged blame, of staff she had driven away, even a mention of her slipping into the nursery at night, moving objects, creating chaos. Before she could thank him, a shadow moved across the greenhouse glass. Samuel stiffened. "Careful," he murmured. "She has eyes everywhere. Keep that close." That evening, the mansion seemed quieter than usual. Victor Ellington sat in his study, a half-empty glass of bourbon by his hand, staring at the flames licking the hearth. He looked older than his years, weighed down by loneliness and grief. Samuel approached the door, hat in hand, and cleared his throat. "Sir." Victor looked up, surprised. "Samuel. It's late. What is it?" The gardener stepped in, his boots leaving faint prints on the polished wood. He held the notebook close but hesitated. "Sir, forgive me for speaking plain. But you've been misled." Victor's brow furrowed. "By who?" "By Mrs. Cole." Samuel's voice was firm, steadier now than it had been in the greenhouse. He set the notebook on the desk, sliding it forward. "I've kept record. Years of her tricks. I reckon you should see for yourself." Victor stared at the worn cover, his jaw tightening. "What is this supposed to be?" "Proof," Samuel said simply. The billionaire's hands lingered above the notebook but didn't touch it. His mind bristled with resistance. Margaret had been his mother's confidant, his late wife's guide in the household, his anchor since Daniel's birth. Could it be possible that she had built her loyalty on lies? He poured another glass of bourbon, swallowed hard, then finally opened the notebook. The entries stared back at him, neat handwriting cataloging deception after deception. The weight of it pressed on him, heavier than his glass, heavier than his grief. Victor's face hardened, torn between fury and disbelief. "If this is true," his voice faltered. Samuel bowed his head. "I've nothing to gain from lies, sir. I've tended your roses and your soil longer than she's tended your table. I'd not risk my post to tell you false." For a long moment, only the fire crackled. Then Victor closed the book, his knuckles white around the cover. Suspicion gnawed at him, but guilt shackled him. "I'll keep this," he said at last, his voice low. "But speak of it to no one." "Not yet." Samuel nodded, eyes steady. "Of course, sir." He turned to leave but paused at the door. "Just remember, sometimes the truth's been in front of us all along. We just need the courage to see it." When the door shut behind him, Victor sat frozen in his chair. His son's faint cries echoed through the halls. The notebook lay heavy in his lap, a silent accusation. And for the first time, doubt wrapped around his trust in Margaret Cole like a noose. The house was quiet after lunch, quiet in the way big houses get when everyone is pretending not to hear the same thing. Naomi used that quiet like a cloak. She moved slowly, lightly, a dust cloth in one hand, her heartbeat in the other. Daniel's nursery was dim again. Heavy curtains. Soft shadows. She paused at the door, listening. A small sound rose and fell, a restless hum more than a cry. She slipped inside. "Hi, little man," she whispered. She didn't touch him. Not yet. She let him hear her voice first. A gentle hello. A soft hum. His head shifted, almost like the sound tugged him by a thread. Naomi glanced at the curtains. She pinched a thin line of fabric open. A blade of light slid in and landed on his cheek. His eyelids fluttered. "Okay," she breathed. "Let's try this the right way." She set the dust cloth on the dresser and took a candle from the shelf, a small white pillar with a clean wick. She struck a match, shielded the flame with her palm, and brought it slowly, slowly toward the side of his face, far enough to be safe, close enough to be seen if anything could be seen. Daniel flinched. Not big. Not dramatic. But real. Naomi pulled the candle back and watched his face relax. She moved it again from the other side. Another tiny flinch. Then stillness. She swallowed hard, blew the candle out, and stood very still, the truth blooming in her chest like a shock. "You see something," she whispered. "Don't you?" She needed another test. Something with sound. She stepped to his right, out of his line of warmth, and clapped once, soft and quick. His head turned toward it. She waited. Clapped on the left. The head turned again. She laughed, a tiny breath of relief that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You clever boy." One more test. She reached into her apron and pulled out the little bundle of fabric she'd been saving. Bright scraps from a discarded scarf. Red, yellow, blue. She held the red a hand's width from his eyes. His pupils tightened, then relaxed. She swapped red for yellow. The smallest change again. She held up blue. The pupils trembled. Not blind. Not fully. Or not anymore. Or maybe never as blind as they'd been told. Naomi let the curtains open a little wider. Not much. Just enough to soften the room into gentle day. Daniel didn't cry. He cooed. His fingers reached into the air as if trying to pluck color from it. A floorboard sighed in the hall. Naomi snapped the curtains shut and tucked the fabric back into her apron. She bent to smooth Daniel's blanket, heart hammering, face calm. The door handle turned, then stopped. No one entered. The quiet returned in a long ribbon. She exhaled, slow. She could feel the shape of the risk now. This wasn't only about a maid and a baby. This was about a story Margaret had told the house, and the house had believed it. She found Samuel on the south lawn trimming the rose arches. The afternoon had turned bright and clean. Raindrops still clung to the petals like glass beads. "Samuel," she called softly. He looked up, eyes narrowing at the seriousness in her voice. "Walk." They moved between hedges, away from windows. "I tested him," Naomi said. "Light, sound, color. He reacts. Not just to warmth. To brightness. To motion." Samuel's jaw worked once, slow. "I figured as much. You're the first to say it out loud. I need to tell Mr. Ellington." "You do," he said. "But not empty-handed. Not with Margaret standing in the doorway." "She'll twist it," Naomi whispered. "She already has him on a thread." Samuel nodded toward the house. "Then you bring a knife, not a thread." "A knife. Proof." They stood in the sun for a long second. Bees droned. Somewhere a door clicked shut. The word proof hung between them like a key. "How?" Naomi asked. "Records," Samuel said simply. "She keeps everything. Doctor letters, test schedules, notes from specialists. Lock and key in her quarters. If there's a lie, it will be there." Naomi felt the risk rise like heat. "If she catches me." "She won't," Samuel said. "She'll be with Mr. Ellington this evening. She always is when he feels worst." Naomi thought of the bourbon glass, the way Victor stared through windows instead of out of them. She thought of Daniel's pupils tightening, reaching for light that someone kept from him. "I'll try," she said. "Don't try," Samuel murmured. "Do it fast. Read fast. Memorize. Take only what you must. And if you find nothing, you found courage. But I think you'll find more." Evening pulled a soft gold across the mansion. Naomi worked twice as hard before nightfall so no one would ask where she was later. Margaret's heels ticked past the nursery at 7, then again at 7:30, then disappeared toward the study where Victor kept his sorrow like an appointment. At 8, the staff hall emptied. At 8:15, Naomi slipped down the north corridor, past portraits that watched and doors that breathed. Margaret's quarters were neat and exact, just like the woman. Not a cushion out of place. Not a hair on the carpet. Naomi shut the door behind her and listened. Silence. She moved to the desk, a tall walnut thing with tiny drawers and a polished lock. She tried the handle. Locked. She pulled the top drawer on the left. Paper clips. The next. Stationery. On the right, ribbons, labels, a small brass key. She held her breath and tried it. The lock turned with a soft click. Inside. Folders. A careful row labeled in the same tidy hand. House. Staff. Deliveries. Medical. Naomi slid out the one marked medical and set it on the desk. Her fingers shook, but her eyes were steady. Letters. Emails printed out. Appointment notes. A doctor's name repeated. Dr. Harold Whitman. Another. A pediatric ophthalmologist. Dates circled. Some crossed. She read. Recommend sustained visual stimulation. Natural light at scheduled intervals. Crossed out in Margaret's pen. Curtains closed. Sensitivity. Auditory tracking exercises advised. Margin note in Margaret's hand. No rattles. Overstimulation triggers distress. Follow-up MRI scheduled. Do not delay. Stamped. Cancelled. Reason, family not available. Naomi swallowed bile. Page after page told the same story. A child who needed light and sound and careful testing, and a gatekeeper who cancelled, delayed, and dimmed. Then she found it, the worst one. A note from Dr. Whitman himself. Partial cortical visual impairment suspected. Prognosis potentially positive with early intervention. Emphasize exposure, tracking, and parental contact. Below it, in Margaret's neat script, condition, permanent. Advise father to lower expectations. Limit staff access. Limit staff access. Keep the room dark. Keep the house quiet. Keep the father alone. Naomi's hands tightened around the page. She didn't realize she was shaking until the paper trembled. She pressed it flat, breathed, and kept reading. In the back of the folder sat a small clear sleeve with 2 business cards, one for Dr. Whitman, one for a therapist who specialized in early stimulation. On the sleeve, a sticky note, not needed. She closed her eyes, fighting the urge to tear the whole folder in half. Proof. She needed proof, but she also needed to get out clean. She scanned for copies, duplicates. There, a second print of the Whitman note. She slipped the duplicate into her apron and smoothed the folder back into place, edges aligned exactly as she'd found them. The lock turned. The key went back in the drawer. She wiped the desk with her sleeve out of habit, even though she'd left no prints but her own fear. Footsteps in the corridor. Naomi froze. The steps paused outside the door, then moved on. She counted to 20, then to 30, then slipped out, soft as breath, and closed the door behind her. She didn't run. Running made noise. She walked, calm and slow, down the hall, around the corner, past the portrait of Victor Ellington whose painted eyes seemed to ask a question Naomi now knew how to answer. In the staff hall, she slid into the laundry room and leaned against the cool steel of a machine until her hands stopped shaking. Then she pulled out the duplicate and read it again, just to be sure she hadn't imagined the words. Partial. Positive with early intervention. Exposure. Tracking. Parental contact. She pictured Daniel's face turning toward her clap. The way his pupils tightened under a ribbon of light. The way his fingers reached into the air like he was learning the shape of the world by feel and hope. The door creaked. Samuel stepped in, eyes searching her face. Well, Naomi handed him the note. He read it once, then again, his mouth a hard line. Now we go to Mr. Ellington, he said. Naomi nodded, but fear still snagged at her ribs. Margaret will say I stole it. She'll twist it like she twists everything. Let her try, Samuel said quietly. He tucked the note back into Naomi's hand. This time you don't bring a thread. You bring the knife. Naomi closed her fingers around the paper. It felt small, flimsy, too light for the weight it carried. But it was enough to cut a story open. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady. In the nursery, a baby breathed in his sleep, and somewhere down the hall a man stared into a glass he didn't want, trying to drink his doubts away. The house still wore its old quiet. But now there was a seam in it, a thin, bright line where light could get in. The Ellington mansion had never known silence like this. Not the calm kind, but the heavy kind, the kind that waits just before glass shatters. Victor Ellington sat in his study, the fire at his back throwing shadows up the paneled walls. On the desk before him lay the folder Naomi had dared to recover, and Samuel had dared to place in his hands. For hours, Victor had read and reread the notes, each word slicing deeper. Cancelled appointments, fabricated claims, instructions scribbled in Margaret's precise hand to keep the curtains drawn, to deny stimulation, to shape his son's future as blind, helpless, pitiable. The bourbon glass in his hand trembled until he slammed it down, amber liquid splashing across polished wood. His jaw clenched, eyes sharp with fury. For the first time, grief was not the heaviest weight on his chest. Betrayal was. Margaret! His voice thundered through the halls. Moments later, her footsteps approached. Measured, steady, unhurried. She entered with her usual poise, her expression smooth, almost curious. "You called for me, sir?" Victor stood, the papers crumpled in his fist. "You lied to me." Her eyes flickered to the folder but never faltered. "I guided you," she said evenly. "I spared you truths you could not bear." He strode forward, slamming the papers onto the table between them. "You cancelled his treatments. You told me his condition was permanent when the doctors said otherwise. You kept my boy in the dark. Literally." His voice cracked with rage. "You made me believe my son would never know light." Margaret tilted her head, unshaken. "Some truths are easier for men like you to accept," she replied coldly. "A blind heir means sympathy. A child of weakness means no challenge to control. A servant who looks too closely." Her eyes cut toward the door, as if Naomi stood there. "That's the true danger." Victor's fists tightened. "You dare." "I protected this house," Margaret said, voice like ice. "I held it together while you drowned yourself in grief and bourbon. You needed someone to anchor you, and I did. What you call lies, I call mercy." Victor's face burned red. "You will not speak another word about mercy." His voice rose, echoing off the high ceiling. "You are finished here. Fired. Effective now." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin smile. "Do you think you can strip me out so easily? This house runs on my order. Without me, it crumbles." Victor's chest heaved. "Better it crumble than rot under your poison." He moved toward the nursery, Margaret's footsteps following sharp and fast behind. The air felt brittle, as if the walls themselves were bracing. Naomi was inside, bent over Daniel's crib, humming softly to soothe him. She looked up, startled by the storm on Victor's face. Behind him, Margaret swept in, her eyes narrowed and dangerous. Victor pointed a shaking hand. "Take your things and leave this house, Margaret. If I see you near my son again." His voice broke, the threat unfinished, but the fury in it needed no end. Margaret's composure cracked then. For the first time, her voice rose, sharp and venomous. "If you insist on throwing me aside, then I'll make sure you remember why you needed me." She lunged toward the window, her hand snapping the shutters closed with a violent slam. The room plunged into darkness. Daniel startled, crying out in sudden fear. Naomi reacted instinctively. She rushed to the crib, shielding him with her arms, whispering soothing words. "It's okay, little one. I'm here. I've got you." Victor roared. In 2 strides he was at Margaret's side, his hand gripping her wrist and tearing it from the shutter. "Enough!" His shout shook the room. "You've done your last harm in this house." Margaret's eyes, dark and cold, held his. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Victor released her with a shove, his chest rising and falling like a storm. "Get out," he spat. "Before I call the police." Margaret straightened her blouse, chin lifting with brittle pride. "You'll regret this," she said softly, almost with pity. Then she swept from the nursery, her heels clicking like a gavel down the hall. Silence settled, broken only by Daniel's cries. Victor turned, watching Naomi cradle the boy in the dim room. She had no authority, no power, no reason to stay, but she did. Her arms around Daniel were steady, her whispers soft. Slowly, his cries faded to hiccups, then to small size. Victor's throat tightened. In that moment, he saw the truth he had missed for so long. Margaret's control had been poison, and Naomi's courage had been light. His voice came low, rough with guilt. You protected him. When I didn't. Naomi looked up, meeting his eyes with quiet defiance. He just needed someone to see him, sir. Victor's gaze fell to Daniel, then back to her. For the first time, the billionaire felt the walls of his house begin to shift, not with Margaret's order, but with something stronger. Something honest. The mansion felt different after Margaret's departure. The air was lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Still, shadows of doubt lingered in Victor Ellington's mind. He had dismissed the woman who ruled his house for decades, but the echo of her poison clung stubbornly. That night, he sat by Daniel's crib, watching the boy sleep. Naomi sat quietly in the chair beside him, a soft lamp casting a gentle glow over the room. Neither spoke at first, but their silence wasn't empty. It was layered, with regret, with new trust, and with the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, everything Margaret had built on lies could be undone. Finally, Victor broke the quiet. You were right, he said, his voice raw. I should have seen it. My son. I failed him. Naomi shook her head softly. You didn't fail him, sir. You trusted the wrong person. But you can make it right now. Her words settled into him like medicine. He didn't deserve the mercy in her tone, but he clung to it. For the first time in months, he wanted to fight for something. Not against grief, but for Daniel. 2 mornings later, Naomi and Victor bundled Daniel into the car and drove into the city. Not to the familiar clinics Margaret controlled, but to a discreet specialist Samuel had helped them find, a pediatric ophthalmologist known for his honesty. Victor carried Daniel himself, holding him close as they walked through the waiting room. The doctor, a calm man with sharp eyes, greeted them without ceremony. Let's have a look at your boy. The tests were careful but thorough. Lights moved across Daniel's vision. Rattles shook softly near his ears. Colored cards were lifted and shifted. Naomi held her breath each time, silently urging Daniel to respond. And he did. Flinches. Head turns. Pupils contracting and dilating. His tiny hands reaching for brightness, for sound, for connection. At last, the doctor leaned back, removing his glasses. He is not fully blind, he said firmly. There is impairment, yes. But his brain is responding to stimulation. The problem is not only medical, it is environmental. Too much darkness. Too little interaction. With proper therapy, light exposure, sound tracking, engagement, this boy has a chance at remarkable improvement. Victor's breath left him in a shudder. He gripped the arm of his chair, staring at his son as though seeing him for the first time. You mean, he could see? Not perfectly, the doctor said gently. But better than he has. Perhaps much better, if we act now. Naomi pressed a hand over her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. It was exactly what she had prayed to hear. Victor nodded slowly, his face pale. And all this time, his voice cracked. I let Margaret convince me there was no hope. Naomi touched his arm lightly. Hope was never gone. It was just hidden. For weeks after Margaret's departure, the Ellington household was quieter, but not hollow. Where once fear had filled the corridors, now there was something different. Cautious hope. Staff who had once moved stiffly under Margaret's eyes now whispered with relief. They worked with less fear, more trust. And at the center of it all stood Naomi Carter. At first, some regarded her with suspicion. She was, after all, just the maid who had nearly been driven out. But the truth could not be hidden anymore. Everyone had seen how she shielded Daniel, how she stood firm against Margaret's cruelty. Changed things. Slowly, eyes began to soften when they landed on her. Samuel greeted her with respect. Maribel, the cook, began setting aside extra portions for her. Even Arthur, the stoic driver, tipped his cap when she passed. Victor noticed it too. Naomi no longer lingered on the edges of the household. She was at the center, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. And though she still bowed her head politely when he entered a room, he felt something shift each time he saw her with Daniel. It wasn't deference anymore. It was partnership. One evening, while Daniel slept peacefully in his crib, Naomi lingered in the nursery, folding small blankets. Victor leaned against the doorway, watching her. There was a gentleness in her movements, but also something else. Something waited. You care for him as if... Victor hesitated, searching for words. As if he were your own. Naomi stilled, her hands resting on the folded cloth. For a long moment, she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. I once had a child. Victor's breath caught. A little girl, Naomi continued, her eyes fixed on the blanket. She fell ill. I begged the doctors to take me seriously. I knew something was wrong, but they brushed me off. Said I was exaggerating. By the time they listened, it was too late. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. She slipped away in my arms. And I swore if I ever saw another child overlooked, ignored, I would fight for them, even if no one believed me. Victor stepped into the room. The grief etched in her words struck him deeply, echoing his own loss. He had drowned his pain in silence and bourbon, but here was Naomi, bearing hers like a wound she refused to hide. He wanted to say something, but Naomi turned, brushing a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. That's why I couldn't ignore Daniel. I couldn't let history repeat itself. Victor nodded, his throat tight. Then I owe you more than thanks. I owe you my son's future. Days later, he called the staff together in the grand hall. It had been years since such a gathering, but today was different. Victor stood at the head, Daniel cradled in his arms, Naomi by his side. This house, he began, his voice steady, was built on my family's legacy. But legacy is more than land or wealth. It's people. For too long, this household has run on fear. That ends today. He paused, scanning their faces. In my mother's name, Evelyn Ellington, I am establishing a wellness trust. It will provide for the families of those who work here, and for Daniel's future care. No one under this roof will be left helpless again. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some gasped. Others bowed their heads in gratitude. And know this, Victor added firmly, Miss Naomi Carter is no longer just staff. She is my partner in this household. Her word carries weight equal to mine. The silence that followed was thick with awe. For a moment, Naomi looked as if she might protest, but when her eyes met Victor's, she saw no charity in them, only respect. She nodded quietly, accepting the mantle. That evening, the mansion felt alive again. Laughter from the kitchen drifted through the halls. The garden lights glowed warmly. And in the nursery, Daniel reached for Naomi's hand as she dangled bright ribbons in front of him, his small fingers curling around the colors of possibility. Victor sat in the armchair, watching. He didn't speak, but his gaze was softer than Naomi had ever seen. For the first time, he wasn't just the billionaire weighed down by grief. He was a father learning how to hope again. Naomi glanced at him, then back at Daniel, her voice low and steady. He's learning to see the world. Every day, a little more. Victor's hand tightened around the armrest. So am I. Their eyes met in the lamplight, not with romance but with something stronger, a shared vow. Together, they would build a new legacy, not of power or fear, but of care, trust, and second chances. And in the center of it all was a child, laughing softly, teaching them both how to begin again. News has a way of slipping through even the thickest mansion walls. At first it was a whisper, a discreet specialist had been consulted, Progress noted. Then it became a murmur, circulating among the staff, carried to friends in town. By the end of the month, society pages that once pitted Victor Ellington's tragic blind heir began hinting at something else: improvement. Sources close to the Ellington estate suggest the child may not be as impaired as once believed. The boy has responded to light and sound therapy under new care. The rumors spread quickly, stirring curiosity and doubt. Where once the Ellingtons had been objects of sympathy, they now became subjects of scrutiny. Victor tried to ignore the outside world, but he knew he couldn't forever. The Ellington name had always attracted attention, and now people wanted to know how much of the story had been truth, and how much had been carefully constructed illusion. Naomi felt the weight of it most. In the market, she heard whispers behind her back. That Maid's got him under her thumb. She wormed her way into power. Just wait. Men like him always fall for the help. It wasn't just class. It wasn't just race. It was both. To them, she was still just a servant, a black maid who should have stayed silent, not the woman who noticed what everyone else had missed. The suspicion rolled off her like smoke, but deep inside, it stung. Samuel warned her. They'll try to make you the villain now. People hate it when truth comes from the wrong lips. Naomi only nodded. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here for Daniel. Still, the murmurs reached her ears each night, and sometimes she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, praying she'd be strong enough to weather it. It was Victor who silenced the noise. One evening, he hosted a gathering in the Grand Hall. Family, board members, even members of the press were invited. The crowd buzzed with speculation, some curious, others skeptical. Cameras flashed as Victor entered, his son in his arms, Naomi by his side. He stood before them, his voice steady but alive with fire. For months, I believed my son was condemned to a life without sight. I was told it was permanent, that there was no hope. And I believed it, because I was grieving and I trusted the wrong people. The room stirred. Margaret's absence was heavy in the air, unspoken but known. But the truth, Victor continued, his voice rising, is that my boy was not broken. He was neglected. And it was not a doctor, nor I, who first saw it. It was her. He turned, gesturing to Naomi. Naomi Carter. The woman you call a maid. The woman I nearly dismissed. She looked closer. She listened. She dared to see what the rest of us refused to. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some faces tightened in disapproval. Others softened in respect. Victor pressed on. She gave my son a second chance at sight. She gave me back hope. And she taught me that legacy means nothing if it blinds us to truth. For a long moment, silence hung heavy. Then slowly, applause began, hesitant at first, then swelling until the hall rang with it. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. Enough to shift the story. Naomi stood still, her face calm though her heart pounded. She hadn't asked for recognition, but when Daniel reached his small hands toward her, she stepped forward. The moment came quietly. After the speeches, after the questions, after the crowd dispersed, Naomi knelt beside Daniel's crib in the nursery. Victor stood behind her, watching. She leaned close, her face lit softly by the lamplight, and whispered his name. Daniel stirred. His eyelids fluttered. For an instant, his pupils caught the light and focused. His gaze lingered, not just on movement, not just on color, but on her. On Naomi. And then it happened. Recognition. His lips curled into a faint smile, his small hand lifting toward her cheek. A tiny gleam sparked in his eyes, fragile but unmistakable. Naomi gasped softly, tears filling her eyes. You see me, she whispered. Victor stepped closer, his own vision blurring. His chest ached as he watched. The maid who saved his son, the boy who was learning to see. For him, it was the true awakening of his heart. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't control. It wasn't the Ellington name. It was this moment. The moment his son saw, and the moment he finally understood what mattered most. He placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder, voice breaking. Thank you, for giving him the world. She shook her head, smiling through tears. No, sir. He already had it. He just needed someone to open the curtains. Victor looked at his son again, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something stronger than grief or anger. He felt peace. And so, the story closed not with riches, not with power, but with light. Because in the end, it wasn't wealth or power that awakened Victor Ellington. It was the moment he saw his son see for the first time, and the maid who made it possible. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to Tales by Amani and hit the like button. More powerful stories are on the way, and you won't want to miss them.